Ayabert had always thought there were only so many ways a person could be hurt after 43 years of marriage. Affairs, betrayals, silence that lasted too long. But when Margaret looked up from her mug that Tuesday morning and said, "Robert, I think it's best if you don't come to the cottage this Christmas," something inside him cracked in a way he didn't recognize. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet fracture, like stress creeping through concrete long before it finally gives way. For a moment, he honestly thought he'd misheard her. The kettle was still whistling. Snow tapped against the kitchen window. Christmas decorations were already half-hung in the living room. "Don't come?" After all these years, she didn't flinch when he asked her to repeat it. "It's not punishment," Margaret said carefully. "It's just things have been tense. The kids think some space would be good." The kids. As if this decision hadn't come straight from her, she sat him down like he was a problem to be managed. Trevor, 41, recently divorced, apparently still upset about the argument last month. Robert had told him, plainly, that launching a cryptocurrency podcast with no technical background was impractical. Trevor called it negative energy. Emma, 38, had taken offense when Robert asked whether her new boyfriend's face tattoos might limit his employment options. And then there was a general complaint. Everyone felt like they were walking on eggshells around him. "You've been so difficult lately," Margaret said. "Everything has to be your way." Robert felt his jaw tighten. "I wasn't being cruel. I was being honest. Someone has to be." Margaret shook her head. "That's the problem, Robert. You always think you're right." The words landed heavier than she knew, because for most of his life, being right hadn't been arrogance. It had been responsibility. Robert was 67 years old. He'd met Margaret in 1979 at the University of Toronto, back when she laughed easily, and he still believed precision could solve most things. He spent 35 years as a civil engineer for the city, working on bridges and infrastructure, projects nobody thought about until something went wrong. He took pride in that, in knowing that quiet competence mattered, that detail saved lives. They raised 3 kids in a neat North York house. Nothing flashy, just steady, respectable. A good life, or so he thought. "Not forever," Margaret said finally. "Just this year. Give everyone some space." She suggested he spend Christmas with his brother Paul in Vancouver, a man he spoke to twice a year, mostly out of obligation. She didn't reach for Robert's hand, didn't soften the blow, just gathered her coat and mentioned she'd be late because of book club. That night, Robert lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling. Memories played without permission. The cottage tradition that started when Trevor was 5. Snow piled high outside, the fireplace crackling, Margaret's tourtière cooling on the counter, grandkids running sock-footed across the floor. And now, gone. Cut out like a tumor, clean and efficient. In the morning, Margaret left early. There was a note beside the coffee maker. Gone to book club. Milk's in the fridge. Robert took his mug downstairs to the basement workshop. The IT was the only place in the house that still felt like his. Upstairs had slowly become Margaret's domain. Decor choices, routines, conversations that no longer included him. Down here, the air smelled like sawdust and oil. Tools lined the walls. Half-finished projects waited patiently. Everything had a place, even if no one else could see the order in it. The family called it Old Robert Puttering Around. A harmless hobby, a way to pass time. Robert wrapped his hands around the warm mug and stared at his workbench. In this quiet, underestimated space, his mind did what it had always done best at IT analyzed. It remembered, and very slowly it began to plan. The idea didn't come from anger. It came from a conversation Robert almost forgot. Back in March, at his retirement party, he'd been standing near the buffet with David Chun, an old colleague who left the city years earlier and was now deep into consulting. They talked shop the way engineers always did, half out of habit. David shook his head and said, almost casually, "Honestly, the biggest problem in modern construction isn't materials or labor. It's coordination." He explained how architects, engineers, contractors, and suppliers all worked in different systems, different software, different measurement standards. Nothing truly talked to anything else. Half the delays and cost overruns, David said, come from miscommunication, not mistakes, misalignment. Then he laughed and added, someone needs to build a universal platform, AI-driven maybe, something that forces everything to line up, could save billions. At the time, it sounded like bar talk, a throwaway idea. But now, sitting alone in his basement workshop months later, Robert felt something click. He remembered the Shepherd's subway line in the early 1990s. before fancy software, before dashboards and buzzwords. He designed a coordination system, entirely analog, paper-based, that tracked interfaces between teams with ruthless clarity. It wasn't pretty, but it worked for years, until newer technology replaced it and the methodology was quietly shelved, city-owned, and forgotten. But Robert hadn't forgotten the principles, the logic, the framework. What if it wasn't obsolete? What if it had just been waiting? That night, he opened his old notebooks and began translating decades of instinct into something modern, something scalable, something smarter. For the next 8 months, Robert lived a double life. Upstairs, he was the difficult husband everyone tiptoed around. Downstairs, he became a student again. At 67, he taught himself Python, watched lectures on machine learning, read white papers on construction tech late into the night, not because anyone asked him to, but because the problem made sense. Margaret noticed the hours at the computer and frowned. "You're wasting time," she said once. "You should be enjoying retirement." The kids joked about it. Grandpa learning to code, teaching old dogs new tricks. Margaret even told her book club he was having a late-life crisis, playing on a computer instead of accepting that his best years were behind him. Robert didn't argue. He just kept building WY November. The prototype worked. He fed it old project data, real-world chaos from jobs he'd lived through. The platform flagged conflicts before they happened, translated between systems automatically, reduced coordination time by 60%, cut projected costs by 40%. It caught errors early, when fixing them was cheap instead of catastrophic. He stared at the result in silence, not triumphant. Just certain point 2 weeks later, he met David Chen for coffee. "I've been tinkering," Robert said, sliding his laptop across the table. "Remember that conversation we had?" David leaned in. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He didn't say a word. Finally, he looked up, eyes wide. "Do you understand what this is?" Robert shrugged. "It's just a system. The core principles are solid. This is industry-changing." David said quietly, "This is the billion-dollar idea. And you build it in 8 months? Alone?" Within days, David connected him to Apex Ventures, a Toronto firm specializing in construction technology. Meetings followed. Technical reviews, market analyses, brutal questions. Robert answered every one without notes. 35 years of experience filling the gaps no MBA ever could. The offer came fast. Apex wanted to acquire the platform outright and keep Robert on as chief technical advisor, 0.7 figures up front. Up to $20 million over 5 years if performance targets were met. Robert told no one, not Margaret. Not the kids. He assumed they'd think he was imagining things, so he hired lawyers. Signed papers. Finalized the deal quietly. The announcement was scheduled for December 26th, Boxing Day. The day after Christmas. The same Christmas he wouldn't be allowed to attend. Margaret left on December 23rd. She stood by the door with her coat already on and pulled the small suitcase behind her. The one she'd packed for him, too. "Just in case you change your mind," she said, not meeting his eyes. Robert nodded. He didn't argue. He wouldn't show up uninvited. He'd spent enough of his life being tolerated. Christmas Eve came quietly. Around 7, his phone rang. "Trevor, hey, Dad. Just wanted to say Merry Christmas." A pause. "Mom said you decided not to come. Maybe next year, right?" There was guilt in his voice, thinly veiled and quickly smoothed over. Robert told him Merry Christmas back, wished him well, and hung up. He poured a glass of scotch and looked around the house. Decorations were up, lights glowing. Everything preserved like a museum exhibit of a life that used to be loud. And yet, he wasn't angry. He was calm. For the first time in years, nobody was disappointed in him. Nobody sighed when he spoke that on Christmas Day, he went down to the basement. He refined the platform, tightened the logic, cleaned code that didn't need cleaning. At noon, he made a turkey cranberry sandwich. Tradition still mattered. Even at the family dinner at 12:12 a.m. on December 26th, the phone exploded to life. "Dad," Trevor said, breathless. "What the hell? Your name is on the news." CBC just sent a notification. It says, "Dad, it says you sold something for $8.5 million. Robert said nothing. The call ended. Then another came. Emma, then Margaret, then Trevor again. The phone rang nonstop for nearly an hour. Robert watched it light up from across the room and let most of it go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to talk. Not why ETBY morning. There were 47 texts, 12 voicemails, 6 emails, old colleagues, journalists, People who suddenly remembered his name. Margaret came home alone that afternoon. She didn't take off her coat. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded. Robert looked at her steadily. "Would you have been interested? When was the last time anyone in this family asked what I was working on? When was the last time anyone cared about my opinion, unless it was to tell me I was wrong?" Her face crumpled. She admitted what she'd said at book club. Linda Morrison had told him anyway, about calling him stubborn, obsolete. "I am old and stubborn," Robert said softly, "but I was never obsolete." That evening, Trevor and Emma arrived together. Apologies came awkwardly, rehearsed but sincere. Emma called his work one of the most innovative solutions Canada had produced in a decade. "I don't care what journalists say," Robert replied. "I care about being respected." He laid down conditions. Space. Time. No promises. Rebuilding only if it was real. The story went national. Dragon's Den called. He declined most offers. Apex set him up downtown with a team of 12 engineers. For the first time in decades, he felt alive that he and Margaret started therapy. Dr. Kapoor's office, Thursdays. "When did you start feeling unheard?" the doctor asked. "Gradually," Robert said. "Maybe 10 years ago. Like dying slowly. Being erased one conversation at a time." Things changed, slowly and perfectly. Trevor brought a marketing proposal in February. By July, he was heading a division. Emma joined an advisory board focused on community impact. Margaret took computer classes, asked real questions again. The next Christmas, they were back at the cottage. Emma's boyfriend was a paramedic. Trevor's girlfriend, an architect. On the deck, Trevor admitted, "Last Christmas was the worst of my life. Even if you'd never built that platform, you still deserve better." Late that night, Robert sat by the fireplace with his laptop. A new project glowed on the screen, predictive infrastructure maintenance. He hadn't told anyone yet. This time, by choice, at a text buzz from David. Quarterly numbers exceeded projections. Robert smiled. He didn't need external validation anymore. At 67, he was just getting started.